podcast listeners. I'm your host, Jacko Zwetsuit, and today is Monday, July 11th, 2022. And joining me via Zoom are three members of the NK News and NK Pro team to discuss some of the recent news stories out of and about North Korea. But before we begin, of course, a reminder to please leave a review about this podcast on iTunes or whatever platform you use, Spotify, YouTube, etc., and share it with colleagues and friends. Secondly, check out NK News, where you can find all the in-depth stories written by the excellent journalists that we'll be talking about today. Consider buying a subscription for a year. It's more affordable than you think. In fact, if you sign up for the annual plan, it's less than the cup of coffee per day, and that helps to fund the excellent journalism that my colleagues put out each and every day. Thirdly, follow us all on Twitter and NKNews.org on Twitter. You'll find our individual handles in the show notes. Now to introduce our three guests today, we have my colleagues Jeongmin Kim, Ifang Bremer, and James Fretwell. Welcome on the show. All right, James, you recently wrote the month in review for June 2022. So we're going to start with you. The NK Pro product. All NK Pro subscribers, of course, receive a month in review at the beginning of the following month. And for today's podcast, you've picked three stories from that review that deserve our special attention. And we'll start off with during President Yoon's meetings with NATO leaders in Spain, as well as in Singapore at the Shangri-La Dialogue, there was quite a bit of talk about trilateral cooperation. Now, trilateral, by my understanding, usually means three sides. Who are the three sides here, and what kind of cooperation are we talking about?
Three sides we're talking about are the US, South Korea, and Japan.
Hold on a minute. I've just done a double take. You can't see because my camera's not turned on, but Japan, you say?
Japan, indeed.
This is quite a change from the last 5 years.
That was why these trilateral meetings were so important, especially the one at the NATO summit between Yoon Suk-yeol, Kishida, and Joe Biden. This was the first top-level trilateral meeting since September 2017.
Goodness.
It was also a complete change of leadership. In 2017, we had Donald Trump as president of the US and also Moon Jae-in as president of South Korea. Of course, Donald Trump was always a little bit, wary about alliances. Moon Jae-in wasn't too keen on Japan, and under Moon Jae-in's watch, because of historical tensions dating back to Japan's colonial rule of the peninsula, relations between Japan and South Korea really deteriorated. So June really marked a kind of rejuvenation of the trilateral relationship. And that's really great news for Washington, because in order to respond to the threats from North Korea and China, it really wants its allies in the region on the same page.
Is President Yoon Suk-yeol himself enthusiastic about trilateral cooperation and working more closely with Japan?
He's very enthusiastic, but we're not too sure about Japan's position. Japan, I suppose, does want to improve relations with South Korea, of course, but it's wary of how from its perspective in the past, it's signed deals with South Korea about historical issues. For example, when the two established diplomatic relations in 1965, there was also a deal on the comfort women issue in 2015. So from Japan's perspective, it's dealt with all these historical disputes in previous treaties, but South Korea, especially under more left-leaning administrations, these deals kind of fall apart. So even though Yoon, the new South Korean president, he's come into office, he's saying one of the things he really wants to do is improve relations with Tokyo. Japan's a little bit wary. It wants South Korea to make the first move. It doesn't want to make yet another, supposedly breakthrough deal only to have it fall apart because South Korea, another administration comes in and doesn't see Tokyo as sincerely reflecting on its past actions. Looking forward, what's going to be really important is the court case the 2018 court ruling on Mitsubishi and forced laborers during World War II. So South Korea could liquidate the seized assets from Japanese companies in Korea and give it out as compensation to South Korean forced laborers. And this could really damage relations with Japan before Yoon has even been able to start improving them. So yeah, that's going to be the really big one to look forward.
Okay, now obviously this was the assassination of Abe Shinzo was quite a bit after you wrote your month in review, and so that you couldn't have predicted that. But President Yoon was very quick off the mark in sending a message of condolences on behalf of the Korean people, wasn't he?
Well, I mean, not so much. There was a little bit of waiting to see how South Korea would respond to Shinzo Abe's killing. He did eventually, the South Korean presidential office did eventually issue a statement. I mean, you know, we'll have to wait and see how the Japanese electorate reacts, whether they see South Korea's statement as, you know, truly meaningful. Yeah, but in my eyes, I think the upcoming court's ruling on the forced labor issue is going to be the really big hurdle to overcome in order to improve relations between Seoul and Tokyo.
Okay, tell us about the Rimpac exercises and missile defense drills. What is being done here?
Well, this was another big, important element of trilateral cooperation between South Korea, the US, and Japan in June. Rimpac are the world's largest naval exercises. 26 countries are going to be participating from late June to early August. It includes the Quad members, so that's Japan, India, and Australia. It's South Korea's largest ever contribution to these exercises. So I think the US is going to be really happy about this. You know, as I said earlier, it's all of its allies coming together to work, cooperate militarily in the region against North Korea and in response to Chinese assertiveness. South Korea is also going to be joining the US, Japan, Australia, and Canada for the Pacific Dragon missile defense exercises in early August. Now, these are important because even though the exercises have been conducted over the last 2 years, it's the first time that that they've been publicized since 2016, I believe. So again, it's this. June was really a month of the US, South Korea, Japan coming together. A lot of these first meetings, first military exercises for a number of years. I think more than anything, it's sending a message to North Korea saying that US alliances are strong, and that if North Korea ever thinks about attacking, then it's going to get a very strong, coordinated response.
And North Korea calls some of these exercises nuclear bomb dropping drills. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, so that was in response to the B-1B deployment to Guam. The US has said it's eliminated those aircraft's nuclear mission in '94. So
not really a fair assessment, it sounds like.
Right.
Right. And how has North Korea released any statements or said anything in response to these meetings and talks about trilateral cooperation and exercises?
Yeah, the DPRK Foreign Ministry describes the South Korea-Japan-US relationship as an alliance, which it isn't. The US has bilateral alliances, but there's no trilateral alliance between Seoul and Tokyo. They describe the NATO summit as part of Washington's plan to contain Russia and China by both militarizing Europe and the Asia Pacific. The Foreign Ministry also describes South Korea's largest scale naval fleet at the Rimpac exercises as lunacy. to destroy peace and stability in the Korean Peninsula, as well as the Asia-Pacific region. So they're not happy. They know that increased trilateral cooperation is against their interests. I'm sure they were much happier when the US was unable to bring South Korea and Japan together.
Right, yeah, they do like their strong words like lunacy, yeah, don't they? Moving on to Jeongmin now. Now, they say that great minds think alike, and Jeongmin, you and James have both picked two of the same stories to discuss today. So I'm going to ask Jeongmin to take the lead on this one, and then James, you can fill in some gaps if necessary. Pak Sang-hak is a famous North Korean defector who runs the group Fighters for a Free North Korea here in South Korea. And they often put balloons up in the air to send propaganda to North Korea. Recently, Mr. Park claimed to have sent medical assistance in the direction of the DPRK. Meanwhile, Pyongyang claimed that it is precisely foreign objects like balloons that are spreading COVID-19 into the country. And they're clearly talking about Pak Sang-hak and his group. So let's start with the basics. What is he actually sending these days? How often is he sending it? And is it actually proven to be reaching anywhere north of the demilitarized zone? Jeongmin.
Well, starting with your final question, there is no confirmation that any of the things that he has flown towards North Korea has reached the North Korean territory, at least the things that were sent this year. This year, there were a total of 4 known launches from Pak Sang-hak and FFNK. The first one was the one where Pak Sang-hak attached a poster of the big picture of Yoon Suk-yeol's face on it, saying that Yoon Suk-yeol won the election. And 3 other launches were early June, late June, and then July 6th. And all 3 of these were about COVID-19. This was after North Korea said that there was an outbreak in the country, and Pak Sang-hak said that he will stop launching anti-regime leaflets, but he will move towards launching items such as painkillers and masks and vitamin C supplements. And the most recent one, Pak Sang-hak said that a lot of them were through the donations from people, South Korean people in LA, the Kyopos. And the latest one was from Gimpo, Gyeonggi province near the border. And that the ones that he sent recently, all 4 of them were in the middle of the night. This was the 3rd medical aid launch since early June. And he has been promising to stop anti-regime leaflets. But the latest one, I think it's kind of tricky to count it not as an anti-regime leaflet, but the poster attached to one of the balloons, it directly rejected the North Korean claim that the alien things, such as balloons, spread COVID-19 into the country. Pak Sang-hak was saying in the banner, including a photo of Kim Jong-un crying, which is from the 2012 mourning of his father, which in and of itself could be counted as an insult from North Koreans' point of view. He was saying that the COVID-19 virus actually came through the China-North Korea border, and the April 25th military parade became the super spreader. So Pak Sang-hak was saying it was not us, but the North Korean regime that spread the COVID-19 virus.
Now, isn't it also the case that when he sent the most recent launch that it was during particularly bad weather?
Right. The latest one and the previous one itself as well. If we look at the video, especially the last one, we could see that it showed rain and also thunder as well. But when I asked Park Sang-hak after the launch, I asked, wasn't the weather a bit bad for the balloon launch? What he said was, raining does not matter, but the direction of the wind matters.
Yeah.
So he was stressing that at this time of the year, the wind blows from the south to the north.
Right. Now, Pak Sang-hak is under some legal charges here in South Korea, specifically for violating the controversial anti-leafleting law that was passed during the Moon Jae-in administration. How is that going? How are Park's legal challenges?
Right, he is indicted for the balloon launch that he did in 2021, but he already challenged the law multiple times, and he has been going against the law basically, although it is an activity that's punishable according to that anti-leaflet law. Interesting thing is that the unification ministry stance is not that different, even if it's a conservative government. The unification minister recently in a press conference said that it's better for these activists, especially Park Sang-hak, naming Park Sang-hak, saying that they understand the 충정, the loyalty, but it's better to refrain considering the sensitivity regarding the inter-Korean relations, and the Unification Ministry has been issuing the same statement against Park Sang-hak's balloon launches.
Right. Now, some activists in South Korea criticized Park and his group Fighters for a Free North Korea, saying that their balloons seem to be more about spreading anti-North Korean propaganda in the eyes of their South Korean and American donors so that money will keep flowing. Is there any validity to that?
James?
That's going to be a difficult one to answer. I mean, Park Sang-hak does publicize his balloon launches the most. I think the concerning thing, the thing to watch out for to me is how North Korea reacted to anti-regime leaflets in the past. Remember in June 2020, it blew up the multi-million-dollar South Korean-funded Inter-Korean Liaison Office in Kaesong in response to these leaflets. And in October 2014, it fired anti-aircraft machine guns across the border, and these bullets ended up in a nearby South Korean village. Now, North Korea claims that its COVID-19 outbreak came from alien things from near the border with South Korea. So you have to wonder if Park Sang-hak keeps really publicly saying we're going to keep sending items over the border, how is North Korea going to react? And as Jeongmin was saying earlier, the Yoon administration has said that it will try and it wants the leaflet launchers, the activists, to abide by the law. But Yoon is in a really tough position because remember it was the previous Moon administration that pushed this law through in the National Assembly, the left-wing Democratic Party, and it was the now ruling People Power Party that held long filibusters, real opposition to this law. So if Yoon clamps down on the activists, well, he might be able to prevent some kind of military crisis, a strong response from North Korea against the leaflets, but he's going to be, I think, really criticized both domestically and internationally by people that will accuse him of cracking down on free speech, of appeasing the Kim regime in the same way that Moon Jae-in supposedly did. And that's going to be a big problem for Yoon because obviously he's built his foreign policy around how he's really going to join in with the US in its regional efforts, take a tougher stance on North Korea. But of course, if he doesn't clamp down on these leaflet launches, well, then Park Sang-hak will probably keep sending items over the border. And we're going to have to wait and see if and how North Korea responds. And I think it could be quite ugly.
And also, when I asked Park Sang-hak what he thought of the conservative government, Yoon administration's remarks on how they want the defector activists to refrain from themselves, Park said that it's not surprising that Kwon Young-se's Unification Ministry is saying that, referring to how the previous conservative administrations, for example, during the Park Geun-hye administration, he said that the language was same, asking for restraint towards these organizations. And it seemed like regardless of how the minister asked the activists to refrain, it sounded like Park's going to continue anyways.
Right. Wow. Okay. Well, let's keep an eye on that. Ifang, it's your turn. You published an extensive story on NK Pro about a cargo ship that appears to have made a direct voyage from Busan to the North Korean west coast port of Nampo in violation of at least South Korean sanctions. And I understand that this vessel is now owned by a North Korean entity. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, we don't actually know if it's owned by a North Korean entity right now. But what experts say is that given the details of the vessel's journey, it's likely that the vessel has been acquired by Pyongyang and in the meantime also used to make a delivery on its arrival trip.
Delivering goods from South Korea to North Korea?
No, based on documents from the Busan port, we saw that in Busan, it only did a crew change. So 16 people arrived in Busan and the vessel left with 8 people to Nampo, but it was carrying several containers and also 2 objects that looked like either vehicles or some kind of machinery. And we know this based on high definition satellite imagery, which we could see from both the time it was in Busan and the time it was in Nampo. So yeah, there's a lot of questions surrounding this trip, but it's very interesting.
A little bit more about the crew change. The people who got on, are they South Koreans?
We don't know. We don't know anything about the nationality of the people on board of the ship. The Busan Port Authority would not give us that information.
Gee. Is this sort of thing easy to do? I mean, could North Korea, in theory, have a ship come from Busan to Nampo every month, as long as it has the money and the connections to get a ship that's going for sale?
In theory, they could, depending on how good of a job the authorities do in trying to prevent this. And what it seems from this journey right now is that at least in Busan, people were not really paying attention to what was going on with this vessel. There's a lot of suspicious things going on. The vessel was flagged. It was first a Chinese vessel, and then it was flagged to the country of Niue. That's a very small island state near New Zealand.
Right, that's Niue.
That's right. And it was flagged for only 1 journey. And that is already, a warning sign. And the owner of the vessel was registered to the Marshall Islands. And it was also, just there's a lot of things that basically seem like the way North Korea has acquired vessels in the past. So,
If this is a violation of sanctions, unilateral South Korean sanctions and UN sanctions, who's at fault for not properly enforcing them? Was the South Korean government lax?
I think you could say so, yeah. I mean, individual countries are responsible for monitoring what happens in their ports and whether any of the vessels that arrive in the ports and go through them are implicated in some kind of sanction violation. So in this case, yes, I think you could say that at least the Busan port should have done a better job in trying to find out what this vessel was doing and where it was going. Yeah.
Well, this ship called the Anhai 6, when it docked in Busan in June, could it have been predicted that it was heading to Nampo or anywhere in North Korea?
No, that's a very difficult question. Maybe it's not fair to say that they could have completely prevented it because the vessel said that it didn't say we're going to Nampo, right? It gave a false information.
Yeah.
But I think if you as a port can list a couple of aspects that are very common in dodgy journeys, then there would have definitely been some red flags concerning the documents that this vessel provided. Yeah.
And are there some existing suspected connections between the Niue ship registry and North Korean sanctioned entities?
Well, we know that the company that flagged the vessel, which is based in Singapore, through their website, I found this link to another domain, marinecoast.com. And when you go to that website, you can see that the company that flagged this vessel is part of a network of companies that flags vessel to small states like Tuvalu, Kiribati, and all of these countries have been used by North Korea to disguise its vessels. And some of these companies have the exclusive agency right to flag these vessels. So yes, there is definitely a past of doing some kind of business with North Korea, whether they knew that at the time or not. Yeah.
And Singapore certainly has an active history of trading and shipping to North Korea. In fact, I remember in 2010 or 2011 trying to visit the North Korean embassy in Singapore, and it was actually located inside the office of a shipping company.
Oh, interesting. I did not know that. Yeah.
And they had names of ships on the board, and those names, sure enough, they looked like Korean names, but all the staff there were Singaporean Chinese. There was not a single North Korean there.
Wow. Yeah. Well, there you go.
And what is the ship believed to be doing now in Nampo?
Well, what we can see from satellite imagery right now is that it's just hanging around outside of the gates of Nampo, which is consistent to what we've seen with other ships. Presumably, it's quarantining before it can actually enter the port deliver its goods, and presumably after that just being used by North Korean authorities as a new vessel. So yeah, probably it'll be there for at least a couple more weeks.
All right, let's move on to the next story. Jeongmin and James, what is this I hear about North Korea adopting a, quote, major military action plan for units facing South Korea that was announced during a recent 3-day Central Military Commission meeting? Who wants to kick that off?
I can explain. So this has been a few weeks since they revealed this. There was a 3-day major military meeting led by Kim Jong-un, and that's quite the length of the meeting itself was quite rare because it's usually less than 3 days, and it also got a lot of headlines because Kim Jong-un was sitting next to the map that showed, censored, but still showed the map of South Korean coastal area, including the East Coast. And in the television footage of the meeting, it also showed the southwest region of South Korea. So, but they did not explain anything related to South Korea or what the plan was about, but they mentioned that they adopted a major military action plan for the frontline units. They did not mention South Korea directly, but they said that it's for the frontline units. But that basically means the units that are facing South Korea.
Right, and in the story that you wrote, you included an animated GIF image of a North Korean Air Force commander pointing at this map that you said is censored. So it's blurred out. Was it blurred out in North Korea, or was that blurred out on their television?
It was blurred out in the North Korean television. The way they showed it, it showed as the blurred version of it. Colin actually found that, but it's interesting because even when it's blurred, it's very obvious it's South Korea. So I think when they show the map and they show the region, there is a reason for them to show them. It's they know that, they probably know that South Koreans are watching it, and it would have been meant something as a signal potentially. But because the meeting itself did not include much details, we do not know what they talked about. But when I met the South Korean unification minister, I asked him what this means. And I asked what constitutes a breach of the 2018 Inter-Korean agreement between South Korea and North Korea. And he said that such meetings that adopt military action plans for the frontline units, that constitutes as breaching the spirit of the Inter-Korean agreement.
Is this kind of major military plan for forward units something that's precedented, or is it something new?
Well, I think as Jeongmin was saying, the details weren't exactly clear, but we've got to remember the context of this situation. So when North Korea says it's enhancing the operational capabilities of frontline units, showing pictures of blurred but obvious maps of South Korea, the big worry is that it could be something to do with tactical nuclear weapons. This is something that Kim Jong-un said that he wants to develop in January 21 at his landmark Party Congress speech. In April, the DPRK tested a new short-range nuclear-capable missile that state media described as a tactical guided weapon. And now Pyongyang seems to be, there's been a lot of, speculation about is it and when will it conduct its 7th nuclear test. And a lot of experts are saying that this 7th nuclear test will likely be for a smaller warhead to put on this new tactical weapon.
Well, but there are other multiple possibilities, like James mentioned. It's like not much detail, but tactical nuclear weapons deployment possibilities. South Korean side definitely seems like they are putting that on the table and maintaining their readiness in case they actually do that. But there are other options, other possibilities, such as if we look at the timing of the meeting, it was actually also, it could have been related to increasing mobilization of the soldiers regarding COVID-19 outbreak. Now that they are saying that it was from the Inter-Korean region, it could also have been about the standing ready against the alien things such as balloons. Considering if we think about the wording, military action plan, we saw this before, although it could be something different. We saw this in June 2020 when North Korean leader's sister Kim Yo-jong was saying that upon authorization of the higher power, which means Kim Jong-un, he told the military to go ahead with the military action plan, and which they kind of did, but Kim Jong-un suspended it at the end of the day. But I'm just mentioning all these possibilities, saying to say that we don't know what it was about.
Right. Ifang, back to you. 41% of North Koreans face malnourishment during the pandemic, based on this new report. Not just about North Korea, but hunger and malnourishment in the world, is my understanding. But it has some concerning statistics about North Korea. So first of all, who's published this report, Ifang?
So this report was jointly published by the Food and Agriculture Organization from the UN, International Fund for Agricultural Development, and UNICEF, as well as the World Health Organization. So it's pretty authoritative. So yeah.
Now, what data is it based on, given that those organizations haven't been able to be active in terms of people on the ground in North Korea since the beginning of COVID?
Yeah, well, so this report is about the years 2019, 2000 till 2021. So there could have been some data that was from pre-COVID times, but as you say, right now they don't have access to at least information on the ground. But they do have some kind of way to kind of calculate this through statistical methods. And they have this kind of formula, without going too much into detail, about the total quantity of foods produced in a country added to the total quantity imported, and then adjusted to any change in stocks that may have occurred. So there are some ways, some data points they use to make this listing of malnourishment in the world.
Can you give us some insight into the statistics, what they say about North Korea?
Well, basically, the statistics say that more than 40% of North Koreans face malnourishment at the moment. That's a gigantic number.
Yes, could you just define for our listeners a little bit what malnourishment means? Does that mean skipping a meal a day, or what exactly does that mean?
Well, that basically means that the amount of nutrients and food and water that you're taking in on a daily basis is not enough to live a healthy life. So that's a quite broad definition, but basically it means that it does impact people's health a lot. And the 41% amounts to about 10.7 million North Koreans who are suffering from malnourishment at the moment.
And is there any thing in the report about where these people are? I mean, are there people in Pyongyang who are going malnourished? Are they part of this 41%, or are they believed to be more out in the provinces?
No, so this report does not include any more information about demographics, age. It's about just the population in general, but you can assume that there are regional differences, of course, in North Korea when it comes to malnourishment. Yeah.
Right. Now, there is perhaps one piece of good news in the report about child stunting. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's said that the prevalence of stunted growth has decreased compared to at least 10 years ago. So in 2012, about 26% of North Korean children were suffering impaired growth. The numbers for 2021 were not included, but at least the most recent years, 2020, it amounts to about 18.2%. Now, I don't really know exactly how it can have improved, but at least that would be some good news.
Yeah, because child stunting is something that you never properly recover from, right? And that's something that would live on for at least for the entirety of that generation. So if North and South Korea were to reunite today, let's say, that there would always be a population of shorter, less physically developed people who are, from North Korea. And stunting also affects brain development, I think, too, doesn't it, Ifang? Do you have anything on that?
Well, no, I don't.
Okay.
I wouldn't know about it.
No, that was a question without notice. But I do recall reading or hearing somewhere that stunting is not just physical size; it's also things like brain development and IQ and ability to solve problems and things like that.
And if I can just add to that, we're talking about good news, but you have to imagine this is still hundreds of thousands of children in North Korea who are not being fed enough right now.
Yeah.
And just to put it in perspective, there are only a handful of countries who score worse on this index. That's countries like Somalia, Madagascar, Central Africa, Haiti, places where the food situation is known to be very dire. So it's very surreal to imagine that just, we live in South Korea. We have plenty of food, and you can go out and get food everywhere. And just, a couple of kilometers north, so many people are suffering from this. Yeah.
No, you're right. I mean, I think, good news is perhaps putting it too strongly. It's a bit like saying your entire house is on fire, but now one room less is on fire. The living room is not burning, but everything else still is. So, you're right. It's relative, and there's still way too many people in North Korea suffering malnutrition, malnourishment, and child stunting. Thanks for that, Ifang. All right, Jeongmin. South Korea to forge new strategic command to counter North Korean threats, and South Korea's new military chief calls for ruthless response to provocations. That's a strong word there. So coming back to defense plans, Jeongmin, you've written 2 stories, one day after another, about South Korea's defense system. What are the 3 axes of the 3-axis defense system?
Good one, Jacko. So the 3-axis system or 3-pillar system is 삼축체제 in Korean. And Yoon has been mentioning that during the election campaign trail for a lot, and then it was included in the 110 national policy tasks, and now it's being implemented with the potential establishment of strategic command as well. So the 3 axes are, first of all, the first one is kill chain. Kill chain is a precision strike operation capability. When South Korea sees the sign of an imminent attack, a missile attack from North Korea to the south, they basically shoot it down before it flies. Is the kill chain. The second
very
part,
different from the cold chain that we've been talking about for the last 2.5 years with the COVID vaccine. So the kill chain,
right? It's a
precision strike. Would that also include a decapitation strike? For example, a hypothetical mission to kill Kim Jong-un?
Well, so far, Yoon has not mentioned directly about including that option into the kill chain, but he implied that by saying that South Korea will build the capacity for the kill chain to not only strike the missile base, but also the origin of the control and command, which is leadership, and which probably means Kim Jong-un. Right. The second part of the 3-axis system is Korea Air and Missile Defense System, KMD, which is for shooting down missiles when they actually already flown before they reach their target in South Korea.
Yeah.
And the third part is
Wait, hold on. Does that include THAAD, or is that totally separate?
I'll have to check that, actually. I think it's not, but yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, yeah. And the 3rd axis?
3rd axis is Korea Massive Punishment and Retaliation, 대량 응징 보복, which is KMPR, after a North Korean attack was already conducted successfully. And some people say that, well, they already attacked. What's the point of punishment?
Yeah.
But if we think about deterrence capabilities, the assured capability of being able to retaliate as a second strike, it's part of the deterrence system.
Now, President Yoon Suk-yeol recently apparently said to his commanders and top officials, if North Korea conducts provocations, we must punish swiftly and resolutely. And you've mentioned that punishment there. Do we have any idea what the President Yoon's administration thinks is a provocation worthy of punishment?
That's a good point, Jacko, and exactly why I thought that sentence was problematic. The 3-axis system, including the kill chain, this is about an imminent attack that's clearly about to happen or have already happened. It's not about every single thing that South Korea sees as provocation. President Yoon Suk-yeol has been using this word provocation very broadly, but very strictly. If we think about what constitutes 3-axis system, it's about a imminent attack, not something like, for example, like North Korea shooting multiple rocket launchers into the West Sea or something. That's not something that will prompt a 3-axis system.
I'm reminded of November 2010 when Pyeongdo was shelled by North Korea, and President Lee Myung-bak at that time was quite prepared to, and I think he was very close to sending a swift and resolute punishment mission to North Korea. But ultimately, the Americans held him back on that. So that one wonders whether President Yoon might, if there is a provocation, it's possible that scenario could happen again. President Yoon might get a little bit too enthusiastic, and the Americans might say, hold on, let's slow down there.
Yeah, I think that's totally possible.
James, what are your thoughts about escalation? When you talk about swift and resolute punishment and being ruthless, it does seem like one of those situations where suddenly miscalculations and mistakes could get made.
Indeed, I mean that's always the worry, isn't it? I think during the campaign, though, Yoon was his language was perhaps a little bit tougher on North Korea than it and China actually than it is now. I think he's softened it a little bit, and I suspect that actually that's because during the election he really wanted to differentiate himself with the Democratic Party, with Lee Jae-myung and Moon Jae-in, and really kind of paint them as kind of appeasing North Korea. But Yoon, the tough conservative, would take a strong stand against North Korea. So that's why it's one of the reasons you should vote for him. But now he's in office. You know, as we saw with his administration's position on the sending leaflets and items into North Korea, right? So I think, you know, the Yoon administration definitely is tightening relations with Japan, with the US, strengthening military cooperation, but they definitely, I don't think they want to do anything to really ignite tensions on the peninsula, because that's bad for everyone, and South Korean people aren't interested in that.
And it was incoming Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Army General Kim Sung-gyom who talked about the need for ruthless retaliation. Jeongmin, what do we know about his military background?
Well, this is a very interesting person. This is a South Korean general decorated for an operation that took out 무장공비, armed North Korean guerrillas in the 1990s. And he also commanded 2 counterfire operations a few years ago against North Korean open fire as well. And he has just recently inaugurated, with the previous chief Won In-cha leaving office and retiring.
His mission, you mentioned, back in the 1990s to round up or to capture or kill the North Korean armed infiltrators. Was that there in Gangwon-do, the ones who had come from the submarine?
No, this was the land inter-Korean border. Yeah, and there were 3 North Korean guerrillas that came in. That this is different from the submarine
yes.
one.
These 3 was in 1992, May 22nd. They went to Cholwon and they were shot to death in Cholwon.
Right. There were 3 of them, and 2 of them were shot to death by the unit that was led by General Kim Sung-gyom. Not general at the time, but he led the unit.
Yep.
And another one got away, but eventually got killed by another unit.
Gosh. All right. Well, that's so he's certainly a man who's got experience on the ground. He's not just a theoretical general.
Right. All these 3 field experiences are considered very, very significant in the history of inter-Korean conflict.
All right. Our last story to talk about, back to Ifang again. North Korea eyes increased cooperation with Russia, Ukraine breakaway regions. That's the title of the story that you wrote for NK News. It's long been suspected that Vladimir Putin's war on Ukraine would drive North Korea closer to Russia, and now we have some evidence that not only is that actually happening in practice, but North Korea is also linking up with the breakaway republics taken from Ukraine, namely Donetsk and Luhansk. What signs have we seen of this, Ifang?
Yeah, that's right. Basically, in May, the North Korean ambassador to Moscow, Shin Hong-chol, he met with the 2 foreign ministers of the breakaway regions, Luhansk and Donetsk, in Moscow.
Oh, they already have foreign ministers.
Exactly, yeah, quote unquote. It's still obviously a very contested area, and yeah, they've been discussing cooperation without going into much detail of what that might mean. And they unfortunately did not get back to me when I asked them what that might mean. Yes.
But do they have a PR office or an email address to write to, these breakaway republics?
They do. They have a website that's fully in English.
Gosh.
With an email address. Yeah. So I found the press release in English on their website. So that's very interesting.
That is very interesting. So what is the situation right now around North Korean workers in Russia? I remember in 2019, Russia reported that it had deported 18,000 North Korean workers back to North Korea in compliance with United Nations sanctions. But what's the situation now?
Oh, we don't know exact numbers right now, but we definitely know that there are North Korean workers in Russia. For example, if you go on like the Russian version of, let's say, eBay, and go to the area in the Far East, so that would be Vladivostok, there are many advertisements right now for North Korean, cheap North Korean construction workers who would just, you can just contract. So we definitely know that they're still there.
Wow.
We don't know on what scale, but there are definitely signs that in the future, there will be larger numbers of North Korean workers to be employed in pretty remote regions of Russia because of basically the DPRK ambassadors meetings with regional leaders actually pledging to send workers in the future again.
Larger numbers. Now, these workers are still supposedly blocked by United Nations sanctions. So is Russia simply deciding unilaterally not to enforce those sanctions?
I think you could say that, yeah. I think the fact that all these press releases are in public and literally, for example, there was one province that I also mentioned in my report. Let me see, that I cannot find the name right now, but where North Korea said it will help out with the sending people to work in the coal mines. And that was just also in public, in Russian media, and also on government websites. So I think it's a signal that Russia says we don't really care anymore about these sanctions. And it's also North Korea signaling that, we have options. We have people that we can work with still.
So you've mentioned both coal mines and forestry or logging. Those are two major industries. What other industries do North Koreans work in Russia?
I think that would be the main industries. Logging, traditionally, a lot of construction, possibly farming, but I think logging and construction are traditionally the most, where the highest numbers of North Korean workers could be seen in the past. Yeah.
And who's likely to gain more from this renewed closeness? Is it Russia or is it North Korea?
I think it's mainly North Korea because it will give some opportunity, to open new networks or reopen old networks for smuggling, but also to raise foreign currency through labor exports. I think when you look at the people, the Russian officials who are engaging with North Korea, it's still very local, very regional. So we don't see these meetings on a national political level yet. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, from each of you, quick final thoughts just before we wrap up today.
Yep, I think the thing that I'm really going to be keeping an eye on is the COVID situation. Of course, Ifang earlier was talking about, that UN reports that really brings home how dire the humanitarian situation is in North Korea right now. The country is still really, locked down because of its COVID measures. It's really paranoid that items from outside can transfer the virus. And that's really going to create a bottleneck for food supplies, for aid deliveries. Another thing related to COVID is, of course, in June, NKNews spoke with Gavi, and Gavi says that they understand that North Korea has started administering COVID-19 vaccines from China, but we're not sure, exactly what kind of vaccine, how many, where, or who they were provided to. So I think that's going to be another really important thing to watch out for.
Gosh, okay. Jeongmin, what are you keeping an eye on for the next few weeks?
Well, for me, the big black box that I'm still really curious about is the military action plan that North Korea adopted. We haven't seen much details on it, but if they do any follow-up meetings, I think that's definitely worth a closer look. And I will also keep an eye on whether or not North Korean state-level media, such as KCNA or Rodong, responds to any of the Park Sang-hak's balloon launches. So far, they didn't, but it seems like Park's doing it on a very regular basis.
Gotcha. Okay. And Ifang, what's got your attention?
I think we need to find more ways to kind of understand what's going on the humanitarian front right now in North Korea. So that definitely has my priority for this summer. Yeah.
Right. And there's the summer planting and harvest as well, and the normally a time of either too much rain or not enough rain. So the weather is a great factor to be looking at as well.
Yeah. North Korea is more and more vulnerable to extreme weather, which we will, of course, only see more of with climate change. Yeah,
that's right. All right. Well, thanks once again to Jeongmin Kim, Ifang Bremer, and James Fretwell for joining me on the NK News Roundtable podcast today. We'll be back again in 4 weeks' time. to do another podcast. We're going to do this monthly from now on. James, since he writes the month in review, will definitely be there, and we'll have two other NK News, NK Pro colleagues as well. It could be Ifang and Jeongmin again, or it could be others. Who's to say? That's the mystery of life, ladies and gentlemen. If you already have an NK News account, and if you're a think tank, business or academic institution, don't forget to check out NK Pro. NK Pro subscribers, of course, receive the month in review that James puts together each month, the big PDF file, also available as an HTML. Our NK Pro platform offers unparalleled services, specifically catering to the needs of professionals who monitor developments on the Korean Peninsula. You can inquire about access or a free trial membership by writing an email to membership@nknews.org today. Thanks, as always, to Arias Dare and Brian Betts for facilitating this podcast, and to our post-recording producer genius, Gabby Magnuson, who cuts out all the extraneous noises, hopefully some of my coughing, awkward silences, bodily functions, etc. Thanks, and listen again next time.